Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1323rd New Social Environment. I'm Magali, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Abigail Lucien, Manuel Mathieu, Tadáskía, Auttrianna Ward, Sarah Zapata, and Angela N. Carroll. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Abigail Lucien is a Haitian-American interdisciplinary artist working across sculpture, literature, and time-based media. Their practice addresses themes of belonging, futurity, myth, and place by considering our relationship to inherited colonial structures and systems of belief and care. Manuel Mathieu is a Haitian multidisciplinary artist working across painting, ceramics, olfaction, and installation. His practice investigates themes of historical violence, erasure, cultural approaches to physicality in nature. Tadáskía is a Brazilian multidisciplinary artist working across drawing, writing, painting, sculpture, and apparitions. Her practice explores themes of transformation, freedom, and cosmologies. Auttrianna Ward is an independent curator, film artist, publisher, and cultural producer, and the founder of Auttrianna Projects. She has spent the last 15 years working between New York, Baltimore, London, Brazil, and Los Angeles. Sarah Zapata employs weaving, sewing, and traditional craft techniques to create loud, architecturally responsive installations that traverse themes of gender, colonialism, and fantasy. And our host today, Angela N. Carroll, is a writer, art historian, and curator based in Baltimore. She regularly contributes critical writing to publications operating at the intersections of art and culture, including Sugarcane Magazine, Black Art in America, Be More Art, and Hyperallergic. And with that, I will hand it over to Angela to get us started.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you all have had a chance to see this beautiful exhibition with these talented artists. If not, please do learn about this exhibition and show, check it out. This really is an honor. All of these artists are doing extraordinary work in the world. And Auttrianna, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a very long time, is continuing to do really extraordinary, exceptional work as well. So it really is a proud moment for me to just be in conversation with everyone and to continue to see the evolution of everyone's practice and process. I want to start first with you, Auttrianna, and thinking about this beautiful show in relation to stillness. I think there's so much happening in the world right now that wants to valley for or vie for our attention, pull us in one direction or another. But I think we don't get enough of an opportunity to think about the ways in which stillness is radical, the ways in which stillness is revolutionary, that contemplation and taking the time for moments of really deep reflection can be a space for incredible healing and also incredible movement, forward movement and trajectory. Can you talk a little bit about the ways in which abstraction as a reflection of stillness inspired the artists who were included in this show, and ultimately what it is about abstraction that continues to excite you and inform your practice as a curator and your vision for and hopes for this exhibition?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Angela. And thank you everyone for joining this talk. I'm so excited to be here. So yeah, when I just think about the process of this show and the process of the last 5 years, which is something that I was thinking about when I curated this, was, coming out of grad school in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, but also in the midst of a really rushed market on young and upcoming Black and Indigenous artists. It was an exciting time. And of course, if you were new, we didn't know that it would sort of go into a cyclical nature, right? Where we wouldn't always be in that space. And so when I thought about this show, I was really thinking about like the realities of the now, which is that a lot of us have had to slow down and really think about the work that we're creating and our purpose as artists and as creatives, and like what stories we really want to tell. And I think that when I think about abstraction, I feel like there's so much space to tell stories in abstraction, because there's so many different viewpoints that the audience can come to the work with. And so that's something that I think about with all of the artists that are in this show, including, of course, Malcolm, who's traveling, so can't be here with us today. But I really feel like it's important to not only let, but also to honor artists who are creating on their own terms, which of course can also be like work that's not abstract, obviously. But I think that sometimes when we think about like the market, there's a lot of pressure to create work that's in the style of whatever the market is wanting. And so just like really thinking of artists who are taking the time to really think about the labor of like the histories of labor in their work. And also you can feel it when you're in the room with the works. Like you can feel the process that Malcolm went through with the braiding and the weaving of his work. You can feel it in Sarah's work. You can feel it in Manuel. You could feel it in everyone's work in the show. And so I think that for me, the show was less about like thinking about abstraction, but more thinking about labor and technique and conversations that are being had around time and space shown through the actual work.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that you've always done that, right? Like historically, as a curator, you've worked really hard to center these conversations that are across the diaspora, that are really broad, that are really incredible. And there's a lot of focus now on the global South as a recognition to say, oh, we've always sort of seen the rest of the world outside of Europe as a subcategory. So now you're seeing movements like global modernism that are having to trek back decades prior and recognize artists from across the world who were contemporaries of Picasso, who were contemporaries to the modernists. And we're now seeing, museums, galleries, institutions say, oh, right, the world is huge. And there's a lot coming out of the Caribbean. There's a lot coming out of the global South. And you've been doing that work since the beginning of your practice, right? Like, hey, look over here at Latin America, look over here at Brazil, look over here. And so can you talk a little bit about that, about this profound vanguard that you've been unpacking and unearthing? What feels especially innovative and expansive about the ways in which artists coming out of the Caribbean and Latin America are expressing themselves and articulating themselves through the materials that they use?
Okay, and thank you for that question. I mean, I do think that we are in a really interesting time. Like it's exciting to see the Wilfredo Lam show that's up right now in New York, and to see these creators who have influenced a lot of us be actually acknowledged in these American institutions, right? So for me, just to begin to answer that question, my actual trajectory in the art space started in Brazil. And so I was always thinking outside of the American landscape because of my experience. So just a little background, I grew up in San Francisco, and then I moved to New York and went to college in New York, and I was in art history classes, and I just was convinced that I didn't really like art because of what was being presented, and I certainly didn't feel included. And I felt non-existent. So I was like, I love history, but I think maybe art's not for me. And so I studied abroad in Brazil because I focus on the African diaspora in the Americas. And Brazil has the largest population of African descendants. And so I studied abroad, and I went to a museum in Sao Paulo, and I saw a painting by an Italian Brazilian painter of a Black man. And I was like, oh, wait, I think I like art. I think I like this. And that for me was such a defining moment. And so for me, I was able to then go back and reach back and realize like, oh, you know, like actually my next door neighbor was a mural artist in San Francisco. Like I've always been surrounded by art, like theaters, art, like all these different things, right? But for me, like Latin America and Brazil especially are always connected when I think about art because of my personal experience in like feeling seen in that space. And now there's so much there's so much growth in like conversations around like Brazilian and Latin American artists in general that I think is really beautiful. But I think that for me, it was this show is like a combination of all of the relationships that I have with different artists and being able to really see where their practices align. And I was just like so glad for this specific group. Because, you know, starting with Tadáskía, who I wrote about for the MoMA, who had a brilliant show at the Sao Paulo Biennale and then at the MoMA in New York, and being able to like trace and connect her work to legacies of Faith Ringgold, right? And really like connected to like a very like New York centered story. And that one, so Tadáskía's work really formed the like the root of the show. And then we spread from there and like and connected other artists in that way. And so when I think about like geopolitics and politics and like I never think about like work or these conversations that are decentering like the American narratives as I don't think about it as like trying to prove ourselves to European or like or even American, you know, institutions because like so famously said, you know, Europe is not my center. So you know, I think I don't know if I fully answered the question, but like I feel like it's important to just be true to your own stories and also just acknowledge and learn about the folks who aren't in the institutions that you go to, you know. So I hope folks get to like really think about that with this show as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, this sort of decentering, you know, this curatorial work and premise has been happening for such a long time, you know, from the work that Elizabeth Catlett was doing to Ukwi and Wazar, to Koyo, you know, like, I mean, we've been seeing this constant sort of working of like, how do we continue to see the world as more than centering on one facet or one perspective. And I think, you know, from the beginning of your career to the present, from Maury residency, you know, when I first met you to all of the phenomenal work that you're doing now, you're really successfully continuing this discourse, you know. So kudos and congratulations, you know, for that and for the work it's felt, it's seen, and it's so necessary. I wonder if we can go back to the slideshow so that I can pull our incredible artists into the conversation in relationship to our next question, which is essentially, you know, how does stillness as a process or a conceptual impetus inform your practice, right? How are you thinking about stillness in relationship to your own work? And so any artist that wants to sort of tackle that first, feel free to jump off mute and think about that question in relationship to your practice. Nobody jump in.
Nah, you gotta choose someone. Nobody wants to get wet, so you
Too
gotta
much
be the
pressure,
teacher
right?
and be like, you come in. So yeah, I'll let you pick up your favorite.
Oh, I thought you were going to be brave, Manuel.
Oh, me?
Yes, no, that's it.
I was creating room to give you the mic, but I ended up holding it. So I can try to answer the question. I mean, the idea of stillness for me is not necessarily I mean, there's ways that you can understand it in terms of the process of the work and meaning what's happening in the studio, and also the what's happening within the work. So it's happening for me in the two places, and the stillness for me in the studio or in the process is something that, you know, at the range of the mental to a certain point. I think it's important, and for me, the studio is a place um, where I connect with myself, You know, it's a place where I don't think, actually. It's not a place that and by thinking, I mean, I read, I have certain conversations, but when I'm in the process of making the work, I'm 100% present. I think there's an interesting paradox when you're making art, in my opinion, is you're doing something that is underlining your ephemerality, because you're doing something that goes beyond you, and at the same time you're experiencing something that is extremely intensify your presence to the world. So you're doing something that is reminding you that you're very much alive, and at the same time you're, you know, dealing with something that reminds you, on the other hand, that you're finite to a certain point. Now within the work, I think there's ways that there's certain subjects or there's certain elements that create space for the viewer, or for me actually, to experience that sense of stillness. And for me, stillness is not it's a state of inertia, but a state where many possibilities can unfold. And that stillness is, to a certain point, a sense of equilibrium, you know, a place where things can unfold, and many possibilities can actually occur. And omnipresence that we're looking at right now is a good example, because the moment you accept that we can be omnipresent, then it means that you're everywhere, right? And I think if you're everywhere, then it means you're in everything, meaning that you reach that point of stillness. You know, I used to, I'm going to finish on that to leave space for the other artists, but I used to think that the extension of my body is not my skin, but where my eyes can lay. So meaning when you're looking at the horizon, then everything that you're seeing around you is basically inside of you. And that for me nurtures a sense of stillness, especially when you're in the process of creating.
Absolutely. I want to stick with you for a minute, Manuel, if that's cool. And then I think we'll go from this question into a deeper dive into the artwork for each of the artists, since we're focused on omnipresence. I think when I first saw it, I immediately heard Alice Coltrane's Transcendence album, right? And
Yeah.
for any of you who are not familiar, check it out. It's, you know, you literally will levitate without even realizing it. You'll leave your body. And so these sort of transcendental states of consciousness that can happen. I mean, Kandinsky is a artist who sort of writes about this a lot, right? How are we finding the spiritual in art? Sun Ra, you know, is an artist who sort of wrote about it and thought about it and acted it out a lot. How are we tuning into the meta through these sonic, psychic, psychological experiences through our art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through our creative processes and practices. And so much of the work that you're doing, Manuel, also congratulations for being involved in and invited to the Venice Biennale, right? In this time where I'm sure this conversation about how do we transcend, you know, is so important at a global scale, right? You know, what is it? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm curious about the ways in which
intuition.
No,
I
sorry.
Plays a role.
Mm-hmm. Like, how is intuition guiding your practice, and why is transcendence through these worlds important for you?
I'm happy you're making those references, those musical references, because, you know, a lot of these artists, they had a very much a free jazz approach to what they were doing. And I think jazz is the epitome of improvisation and intensify your presence to the world. You know, I think the beautiful part of our music is that it forces you to be 100% there. And this is something that I'm trying to, you know, grapple with as a painter, because I think even if we can understand painting as a residue of my thoughts, right? They accumulate into an object that basically holds the different marks or the different traces of my presence. But it's not the same thing as playing something live. You know, there's a reference of temporality that is very different, even though there is temporality in a painting, depending on how you organize it and the color. I think the aura of a painting is basically the colors that you use, because it's something that draws you in, that you can see from afar. So, but the temporality for me, it's the way you deal with the language to create that kind of sense of composition that, you know, brings you certain places, invite you to stay in certain places more than others. And I think within the experience of the piece, of that temporality, that's kind of where you have that sense, that musical perception. Um, and and you can basically, through the fact that your interpretation and your intuition can be so slippery, you have to be able to engage more profoundly with the work, because I like this. For me, it's important in the process of making the painting. There's a moment where I ask myself, what it is I'm looking at right now? You know, what is this? What is this thing that I'm dealing with? And this thing can happen in many ways, because at some point, I really love the idea of patina. You know, at some point, it wasn't about adding paint, but it was about the painting. What if the paint is already there, and I'm just basically scratching the surface to kind of let something come out. And that talks a lot about the process. And if you get back to the intuition again, then you get moments of revelation when you're dealing with the painting. If you're scratching something, there's certain things that appears, and you're like, oh, this is worth staying or existing within that moment. So there's many ways that I go back and forth between my capacity to trust my intuition and the certain search of balance, because the intuition doesn't necessarily come balanced, you know. That's the beauty of it, because I think that's what practice and mastery gives you to a certain point, is the more you do it, the more you're capable of understanding, oh, this is actually something that is being revealed to me that is 5 steps ahead. So I'm gonna take that in consideration, but then I'll just keep moving in a pace that give me the possibility to integrate it within the painting, you know. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to, jump forward and invite some of the other artists in. Abigail, if it's cool, I want to jump into you and think about the ways in which your work is playful, but also is laden with so much history, right? So much memory work. And so I'll start first and foremost with, this question of how does stillness as process, as conceptual impetus inform your work, if it does at all? And then kind of meander from there into the ways in which history is really important to your work as well.
Yeah, thank you for
Before
that.
you answer, can we acknowledge your background? This is so beautiful,
How do you mean?
Abigail. The
Oh,
colors
this?
and like, I mean, I don't even know if it's real. It's like, you know,
It's
I'm like,
real.
what am I looking at? Anyways, I interrupted you, but I was like, wow, this is
No, it's my UV screen to protect from
it's
the brightness.
it's beautiful. I
Yeah,
mean,
you gotta get stream on
anyways, yeah, I know, I know. Anyways, sorry to interrupt, but I
No,
was like,
I'll send you a link, Manuel. But yeah, thank you, Angela, for this question. Thank you, Auttrianna, for bringing us together. Thanks everybody for being here. It's been like so special to kind of like reflect on the works that are in the show and the dialogue that they're having together. And in this relationship to stillness, I think I've been actually thinking about like its relationship to movement a lot. And I think when Auttrianna was curating the show and we had our studio visit, we were sort of talking about this kind of way of moving that may be so slow, so elongated that it feels sort of like it's indecipherable from movement at all. And it almost kind of like has like a faux sort of like stop. And I kind of think about that as like similarly to what Manuel was saying, is like a space that happens, a sort of presence that happens when you're in the studio, thinking about like what it means to sort of step into that threshold and kind of step into this like routine, if you will. And I think a lot about this kind of stillness, being able to have this kind of capacity within the material that I'm working with as well. metal is like such and particularly like iron, is such a deep sort of relationship um, to the history that you're sort of nodding to, Angela, right? These sort of like deep sort of revolutionary Caribbean histories, and for me particularly, it's very personal when it comes to thinking about like Haiti as a site, as well as like a charge site for liberty and both like liberative histories and futures, right? For Black geographies, and so for me, I've kind of dug really deep into like the research of what that materiality is, or how that sort of stillness kind of fits inside of that materiality. And I could kind of go a long time talking about like the cosmic relationship to iron in this earth, and like its sort of constant movement that it has, even in sort of stationary or assuming stationary spaces that we interact with it, right? There's this kind of constant breathing that it has. It's sort of eroding and sort of growing at the same time. And I'm kind of curious about how that has a relationship to us as like living beings, right? Like sort of moving in slowness, but also sort of accumulating and eroding and sort of like moving forward at the same time. And so when I think about how the work like engages and play as like this way of thinking about like a decolonial vernacular, if you will, I think a lot about how there are these sort of spaces of history that are very so contested that there's room for speculation. There's room for both not just speculative futures, but also speculative past, thinking about history as sort of almost kind of like a myth in itself. And how do you sort of weave or play with those kind of myths? And the work itself kind of has these moments where things are almost kind of frozen or kind of like still and steel. And there's something about that that allows me to kind of, imagine this kind of like invisible thing moving through it, or kind of being able to have this kind of softness through something that feels so layered with a kind of memory of being sort of strong or being sort of like impermeable. And yeah, I wonder about that as like a way of kind of thinking about like re-altering sort of thoughts of the past to kind of move towards a future scape or thoughts of the future. Yeah, just many things I'm thinking about. I'll stop there, but
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And in this relationship to the kind of, this huge chronology of time that continues to inform the work, Sarah, I want to jump over to you and thinking about the ways in which the matriarchy, right, that the traditions that you're working with textile are very much tethered to like women's labor, right, to the craftsmanship of women, to the labor of women. And so I'm curious about what continues to draw you to these materials and how memory and the specificity of geography and culture continues to reinvigorate these practices, but then maybe also, speak to the ways in which this history of refusing to be erased.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you, Auttrianna, of course, for bringing us together. Yeah, I think certainly textiles are this incredible, like living document to us as humans, as well as to tradition. I think tradition is something that I'm always thinking about, and how it is at once timeless but not unchanged, and how to kind of imagine the future and not this like starkly different way, but what does it look like if these living traditions are something that continues to persevere and define where we are. And I love so much that that exists within this very deep history of women's work. And so for me, I feel like the material in itself is very political, think about a work of art that's made with acrylic yarn versus acrylic paint. One is allowed to be something that's intellectual, whereas the other one is sort of like denigrated to craft. And so for me, it's about celebrating these traditions and being overtly so, to the point that at times it's ridiculous. But I think that that also is really important in speaking to that tradition. And so specifically, I use handwork that is derived off of traditional techniques, but also not replicating them. I think that that's also really important to think about how these techniques are living and are able to achieve the sense of imagined time, and how that honors the women that came before me. And especially as we're thinking about abstraction, some of my favorite abstract works are the ones that were made in southern Peru and the Nazca and the Paracas, the pre-Columbian civilizations, where those works were thought of as primitive or primordial, when actually they were incredibly prescient, incredibly intellectual. And so thinking about these hierarchies that exist within not only the materials, but the techniques, and how it's about honoring and carrying on these traditions, but how they can be even more salient and important today and moving forward.
Absolutely. And how would you say that stillness kind of informs your practice and process?
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear Abigail and Manuel's answer. And I feel like movement, I think, is something that I think about with stillness as well. There's this Andean sensibility of making just to make, and that it's the art of working with your hands and that sort of repetition that creates almost this meditative state. And I think that's certainly there within textile techniques. Weaving itself is such a slow process, but it's one that sort of enables your hands and your body to be occupied, so then your mind really can be free and think through things in this very clear sort of state. I've been listening to this podcast about Fela Kuti and his work and the music, and like he would have these songs that were just the same repetition, the same bar for 20 minutes. And so it kind of really enabled your body to kind of get into this unlocked sort of state. And I think that that's certainly how I think about weaving. It's this repetition that unlocks something within you, and then you're able to yield this like very physical manifestation of that experience. And so for me, I think within the work, stillness is unlocked through chaos. I think there's a lot that can be accessed through busyness and through fantasy, especially things now are becoming more gray and more bland. And so how can we have this contrast of being in a space that's full of color, it's full of texture, it's full of the human hand, and how that unlocks something within them?
Thank you for that. I want to push over to Tadáskía in thinking about this kind of frenetic energy that you're tuning into through textile, through hanging installation and sculpture, but also through the ways in which you're thinking about language, repetition, mark making, right? And how this is a kind of queering of form, a transgenderness. It's thinking through confusion. It's automatic, but it's also kind of breaking from that tradition of automatic writing, becoming something else. It's operating in these new spaces in this liminal in ways that are really beautiful. And it's also speaking to a new way of working for you that you're calling, where you're introducing a new character, Garota Humamenta, Perdida, and excuse the pronunciation, but which is a humanly lost girl. And so can you speak about this new figure that's recurring in your work, the ways in which language is continuing to inform your practice?
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Auttrianna, Brooklyn Hale, and Peter Bloom, and everyone here. Thank you. I will speak in Portuguese, so. um, um, Então, Essa é a primeira vez que a garota humanamente perdida aparece, não sendo nomeada, mas como rastro. Vinícius, você tá aí?
Yeah, so I'll translate. So this is the first time that the humanly lost girl appears as a trace,
Não, não ainda como nome.
not yet as a name, but as a trace.
É, meus trabalhos costumam apresentar algumas personagens.
My work usually presents some different characters,
E algumas delas têm energias que vão para o alto e outras que são energias mais densas, mais obscuras.
some of them they are characters who have this type of higher energy that goes up, and some others are more dense
Energias mais obscuras.
and obscure energies, yeah.
E então, pela primeira vez, aparece uma garota, uma personagem que quer ser humana.
And so for the first time, a character appears, a girl that wants to be human.
É, Então, nas escritas da pintura, tem um momento que ela diz: She is me. Ela
So
sou
in
eu.
the so in the writings, in the paintings, there's a moment where she says, ela diz o quê de novo?
She is me. Ela sou eu.
Ela sou eu, she is me.
É, Mas até agora eu não sei até onde essa garota humanamente perdida quer ir.
But until now, I don't know where this humanly lost girl wants to go.
E então ela vai aparecer, já está aparecendo num próximo trabalho.
So she's appearing in the next work,
Porque no primeiro que ela apareceu, que é o da galeria, ela aparece já ali se mostrando, né?
because in the first one where she appeared in the gallery, she appears showing herself.
Ao mesmo tempo, ontem eu estava vendo um trabalho onde ela já tinha aparecido antes,
But at the same time, yesterday I was looking at a previous work where she already appeared
mas
before,
ainda não como humana.
but not yet as human.
Ela, ela, ela estava aparecendo como alguém que queria um mundo melhor para
She
todo mundo.
was she was showing herself as somebody who wants a better world for everybody,
Agora ela não tem tanta certeza sobre isso.
but now she's not so sure about it.
Então ela caiu.
So she fell down.
E eu acredito, e nesse momento que ela cai, eu acho que ela se pergunta também. Ela se pergunta, não, ela diz: Eu quero sonhar com você. I wanna dream with you.
And at this moment of falling, she says, I want to dream with you.
Mas ela, ao mesmo tempo, lembra: Ela sou eu.
But at the same time, she remembers, she is me.
Mas a pergunta é: quem é ela, já que ninguém sabe muito bem quem ela é?
But the question is, who is she? Since no one knows exactly who she is.
E então essa é a garota humanamente perdida.
So this is the humanly lost girl.
É.
Thank you for that. Can you speak to the ways in which this is a new direction for you, specifically not just how the girl is showing up and now choosing to be human, but I guess why? Why the presentation of her as human as opposed to other transcendent forms? And do you feel like it's a kind of channeling that they show up the ways that they demand to be, and that you're kind of just interpreting them as they tell you they need to be presented?
O que mais ou menos que ela disse? Às vezes eu me perco.
Sim, sim, porque essa personagem está, tipo, virando humana. É um tipo de canalização onde ela, no caso, aparece para você, porque, como ela está falando da transcendência, da forma transcendental, por que que ela está tomando essa forma?
Uhum, tá. Thank you. É, ela tá tomando essa forma porque primeiro, eu acho que, enfim, não vou explicar não, mas eu vou dizer que para mim as personagens elas têm ânima. Acho que é importante dizer isso, que as personagens têm ânima, têm vontade, têm desejo.
Yeah, so she does. I'm not gonna explain myself, but for Tadáskía, it's important to say that the characters they have anima, they have this type of agency.
Uhum. It's like animation, anima, soul. Então, alma, alguma coisa em português, alma.
Alma do
E,
soul. Uhum.
então, por ela ter alma, ela entra dentro de um, como se fosse um, um programa animado, um programa
Since
animado, onde vários personagens entram e saem de cena.
since she has a soul, she's entering this animated program where other characters come and go.
E até agora tiveram essas personagens que são com energias muito altas e outras muito baixas.
And until now, there have been different characters with elevated or dense energies, different types of energies.
E agora surgiu uma ânima que quer ser humana.
But now, this new character appeared wanting to be human with this type of anima that wants to be human.
Mas ela não está totalmente certa, então eu não sei até onde essa personagem vai.
But she isn't totally certain yet, so she doesn't know where she will go next.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And how beautiful to have a practice and a process where you're open to what comes through and how it comes through, and keeping that authentic. How would you say that stillness continues to inform your practice and process, since there's so much movement in your work as well?
Sim. Na ave preta mística, Mystical Blackbird, é possível, eu acho que é talvez mais fácil encontrar a quietude.
So in the mystical blackbird, it's perhaps easier to find stillness.
E é uma das personagens que me fez chegar até os Estados Unidos.
And it's one of the characters that made me get to the United States.
Ao mesmo tempo, na minha segunda personagem, que é a Lua Coelho Negra, Moon Black Rabbit, essa quietude já vai se quebrando pelos buracos que ela entra.
At the same time, my second character, the Moon Black Rabbit, starts encountering this type of holes along the way.
Né, nesses buracos, né? Então a quietude vai se
These
quebrando.
holes. So stillness is kind of breaking down.
E na exposição que está agora na galeria, a quietude está instável porque a garota ainda sequer foi nomeada. Eu que estou nomeando agora.
So in the current show at Peter, stillness is a quietude está. Desculpa.
Ela está instável porque a
Yeah,
garota ainda sequer foi nomeada. Eu estou nomeando ela agora.
yeah, stillness is unstable because the character hasn't been even named yet. So I'm just coming up with the naming right now.
Então, tem essas cenas que quase são paisagens, mas tem esses rabiscos atrás.
So we have these scenes that look almost like landscapes, but they have these strokes behind in the back.
Então fica essa dúvida se são paisagens oníricas ou desse mundo que ela acabou de sair, desse mundo que ela quer ir.
So we don't know if these are dream-like landscapes or if it stems from her own world, where she's coming from,
Ou do mundo que ela quer ir.
or the world she wants to go to.
Mas uma coisa a gente sabe é que ela quer sonhar com você. She wanna dream with you.
Yeah, that's the one thing we know, that she wants to dream with you, of you.
Mas quem é esse outro que ela quer sonhar?
But the other that she wants to dream with, we don't know.
Thank you for that. This moment right now, it's so important for us to be dreaming radically, right? To be dreaming and imagining with each other the world that we want, the environments that we want, the communities that we want, right? The importance of radical dreaming, radical imagination is, I think, so prescient now, so important now, perhaps more so than ever before. So I'm honored to be in conversation with dreamers who are not afraid to dream, who are not afraid to articulate their dreams in material form. Auttrianna, I want to, well, before I jump to you, I also want to acknowledge Malcolm Peacock, who could not be here today, a young emerging artist whose work is so beautiful, and it's been lovely to observe their practice and process over the years and see them continuing to thrive. And so just a moment to sit in the peace and the beautiful blooming of Malcolm Peacock's work as well here, represented in this glorious exhibition. Auttrianna, I want to leave with a last note from you before we jump into our questions from audience members. What are you most inspired by and excited about for this exhibition? What are your hopes for people's experience with this work and with these artists, if you have any at all?
Thank you. And thank you for these questions. I want to go back to what Tadáskía was saying about the mystical blackbird. So that was what Tadáskía presented at the MoMA. And that was what inspired this show. So that I think that to be inspired, and to not only be inspired, but to act on your inspiration and to trust yourself. I feel like I've learned that in like my conversations with Tadáskía throughout this whole process. So that's something that I want the artist and viewers to experience, and to just know that it's okay to take the time that you need to take.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm going to pass the mic back to Magali. Again, so honored to be in conversation with you all. So grateful for the opportunity to see your work, for the world to see your work in greater ways. And I look forward to continuing to see and support your practice and process for many, 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 many years to come. Blessings to you.
Thank you so much, Angela.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you all. Before we jump to the questions, I wanted to know if y'all had any questions for each other, because we have about 10 minutes left.
So I had a question. So I think both Manuel and Sarah mentioned music, and I wanted to know, I'm really curious about like other forms of art that influence y'all's practice. So film, or like literature, or just anything recently, or particularly any work that's in this show.
You want to go, Sarah?
You're already unmuted, so you go first.
Oh my God. Second time you trapped me. Okay. Learn. What was the question again? You caught me off guard.
other media that influences your work and maybe even like works in the show?
I like I think, well, I don't want to say literature, but certain books and certain writers and certain thoughts really I mean got me to my core in terms of like whether it's spirituality or a form of spiritualities, basically. Um, if I have to be honest with you, I outside of music, and if I think about maybe theater, uh, and I think if I want to connect with the piece in the show, anonymity, I keep having this idea of how there's a piece of from Pina Bausch that I keep on repeating in my head, where this couple were hugging and unhugging and hugging and unhugging, and 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 within that thought process, I was like, how can you experience that emotion through your body? Because I think the way that we deal with our emotions create a form of mental elasticity on how we perceive our bodies. And when we think of anonymity in theater or performance, as a matter of fact, it really gives you the possibility to exist beyond your body, whether it's in the play or the sounds that you make. When you think about a scream that echoes at the bottom of the chest of the viewer, suddenly your body start existing inside of someone else, you know. And when I'm thinking about an, um, anatomy, um, in the way that I stretch the figure, and I display its structures, it's a way for me to question the way that we experience our bodies and how we can, through our gestures, through the certain repetitions, or through certain sounds, or the movement of breathing, we can actually enter in relation with a certain amount of the group of people. And that's what I think performance somehow gives me, that sense of inspiration. Um, when I think of the movement of we're talking about stillness, but the movement of the body, the relationship with the other body, the space, these are elements that basically nurtures that sense of anatomy that is present, or that is one of my concerns in that piece in the show.
Thanks for sharing. I agree. I think music is really important to me just as a human, but certainly to my practice. I think having, I think time being delineated by like a particular playlist, like usually every work will have a playlist that I'm making, and it's like usually a lot of soul music, a lot of jazz, a lot of just like instrumental, corny, like telenovela, like themes. I think it's important to exist in the now when your hands are busy, but also like accessing memories. But it's also a dangerous space to be in of if you're like too deep in memory, and how to like police, I think, how you're existing within time. But I agree. I think movement is important and text is important, and particularly with these works. I was reading this archaeologist, Daryl Wilkinson, who has this paper that talks about geoglyphs. And so the embroideries really were like my sort of geoglyphs. And he argues that the Nazca lines and other geoglyphs are this um, particular exercise of anarchy. They're kind of just this way of sort of working within the earth, within the land, but also mark making. And the Nazca lines in particular, they're these beautiful figurations that are also echoed on the textiles and ceramics, but they were made basically for people to just walk these figures over and over. And so I think certainly seeing that movement, seeing that repetition, and what has survived all of these centuries is so important. I think I got off topic, but that's particular.
Yeah. And if we have time for Abigail and Tadáskía.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know where the boundary is and like what media, influences things. I feel like I'm pretty like, I'm a deep like air sign, so anything can kind of like move me around. But I was thinking about recently, um, my partner and I were watching Sailor Moon, and this was their first watching of it, and they were like, "Oh wow, this your work makes so much sense at the moment." And just thinking about like the power of animation and manga, especially when you're young and you're sort of like thinking about how things move. I remember really specifically when like watching so many music videos when I was like a young girl, and like um I remember Mariah Carey's Heartbreaker music video, and I would ask my mom to like pause it when there was this animation happening so that I could draw and so that she could like help me draw these like stills. And so I don't know, something about that is like hitting me when I think about like media over time. Music is so like everywhere for me. I love, Sarah, that you make a playlist for every piece. That is it's so incredible. I feel like I have phases that I live through, like seasons of playlists, right? Where like one will get kind of old, and then I'll be like, oh, let me go back to something else, or something is kind of like being created forever. But yeah, it's hard to know where that boundary is of like even being like out and like on the subway feels like a sort of media experience in its own. So it's hard to kind of to feel like there's a boundary of that with the way that I feel.
Tá aí, Vinícius?
Yes, estou.
Então, eu depende do momento, depende da fase.
Depends when, yeah, depending when I'm at
Depende da fase.
the stage
Depende
where I
do meu
am,
momento.
the moment.
Então eu às vezes vem muito de teorias assim meio físicas, sabe? Sobre alienígenas, então eu vejo muito vídeo sobre alienígenas.
I watch a lot of UFO videos and physics theory.
É, é, e eu amo dançar, então eu fico
I
dançando
love I love dancing
tudo.
all day long.
Mas quando eu tô no ateliê, eu costumo ficar num completo silêncio.
But when I'm in the studio, I usually just stay in complete silence.
Então, depende do. Se eu tô fora do ateliê, eu acho que eu sou muito barulhenta, mas dentro do ateliê eu sou muito pouco barulhenta.
Outside the studio, I'm very noisy, but inside, I'm really silent.
Yeah. E então é isso, livro, eu gosto muito de filosofia também. Eu também gosto muito de livros que envolvem educação, filosofia.
I'm pretty interested in philosophy and educational books,
E, e música. Música e desenho também.
music, and drawing.
Não, é aquele desenho animado.
Cartoons.
É,
Cartoons.
Thank you. I love everybody's answers. So Magli, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you all so much. That was such a wonderful conversation, and I really enjoyed learning more about everyone's individual works and how they all came together. For our audience, if you have a question for our guests today, there is a link in the chat where you can submit your questions. The first question we have, this one is for all of you, says, Rinzai Zen Buddhism is centered on sitting in silence or sitting before a stone garden. Do Zen practices inform your art practice? Are there specific cultural or meditative practices around stillness that inform your work?
For me, yes, definitely. Meditation and being like just like thinking about how I treat my body is really important. Like how I'm nourishing myself. And because I think that when you're putting your ideas and your dreams out there, like you have to be really clear and like really able to connect with whatever you need to connect with to be able to push forward and to be brave when you don't want to be. So I think definitely that's like the theme of the season, right? Is like being quiet. I like that question.
Anyone else before I move on to the next question? Okay, amazing. The next question is, what does, I know Manuel, you touched on this in Tadáskía, you started talking a little bit about this, but what does the studio signify for each of you as a space, and what are your studio routines?
I can start. Um, I think last week I had students coming here and they asked me something along those lines, and what I came to realize is the studio is a sort of incarnation of my what's in my head, and I don't mean like as subjects, but like you're literally physically walking inside of my head. When you're in your studio, because I'm a bit of an animist, so every objects and every elements and every color, they're basically feeding a sort of frequency that I'm trying to nurture in the studio. And it's a frequency that is there to, make me jump and go work on something, or basically rest my mind and trying to seek for some kind of signs, or ignite a certain desire to capture something. And to be fair, I drink tea. I was drinking tea here. I think tea is a sort of ritual that is important to me. I think is very humbling. I drink a lot of tea. Um, and I make perfume these days, so sometimes I smell. Sometimes I just smell certain tests that I have around, and it really forces me to imagine differently. So it's kind of like I think for me the studio is a place where I nurture different velocities to reality. Meaning sometimes it's something that is exciting and forces me to act, and sometimes it's something that has a slow pace, and all these things nurture a sort of connection to reality for me.
I was just thinking about how a lot of my studio feels very like grounded in process-based methodologies or like ways of working, and I really have this kind of deep belief in process being a way to slow things down, or connect with like not just a present moment, but a sort of ancestral one too. And um, I think it's like a it's like a it's a moment of like actually learning a lot of the times. Like I think I lead in like, or I try to lead in curiosity in the studio, and try to be thinking about like, what am I processing while I'm processing, like what am I processing in my mind while I'm processing with my hands, and thinking with my hands in like a real way. And um yeah, I'm thinking about what you said, Tadáskía, about sometimes not, or like being silent in the studio. And I definitely can have these moments where I feel it's necessary to kind of like shut off types of stimulation so that you can just sort of like be in that moment. Um, and I think, you know, the discipline of having a studio practice in the first place is a ritual of its own. Um, but on the daily, like I have I tend to write every time that I enter the studio. On in the first like sort of 10 minutes, I sit down, I write, and then I kind of have this sort of like a bit of like a necessity to clean, but also a kind of like a sort of like energy space of a kind of like wiping things down, right? And trying to kind of refocus into to where I was. And I think a lot of that is because my practice for me has been this sort of yeah, this place to kind of like to move things that in times that feel like other things are immovable or unchangeable, right? Um, and and that to me has always been kind of like a sacred thing that I try to protect.
I agree. I think so much of what you just said, I feel like resonates with me. But certainly it's a space that I like to have. It's like very self-romantic. I like to create a space that I like spending time in, just because I have to be there a lot. And I also am just very invested in Luddite technology. Like I have Wi-Fi now because I'm at ISCP, but usually I do not have Wi-Fi. I listen to the radio a lot. I have a whole cassette tape collection, and I am there usually doing my research, which is usually in my collection of books. Just because I feel like the internet is incredibly revisionist and there's so much that only exists within sort of the written text. So it's always about, I think, cultivating a space where I want to feel like a scientist, but I also want to feel untethered. So I think it's about capturing wherever I'm at in the process of the work, whether it's research or actually making it. So it feels very much like a space that's just for me.
É, depende, para mim depende do momento. Muitas das vezes eu tiro longas férias do ateliê.
For me, it depends. Sometimes I take a long break from the studio.
E não passo nem perto.
I don't get close to it.
É, mas eu tenho os meus cadernos de imaginação, que são histórias que eu vou escrevendo,
But I have
comigo,
my
tá
note,
sempre perto de mim.
but I have my notebooks where I write stories. They're always close to me, my
E,
imaginary stories.
é, é, então depende, às vezes para mim é importante ficar longe do ateliê, não porque eu não tenho imaginação para criar, mas porque eu acredito que dar um tempo para mim é saudável.
I just think it's healthy for me to stay away sometimes from the studio space because not because I don't have the imagination to do work, but just for the possibility of a break.
Sim. Então, é isso. Eu mesma, a última vez que eu tinha ido para o ateliê foi para fazer o trabalho para a exposição. Aí voltei agora.
The last time I went to the studio was to do the work for this exhibition, but now I'm back at it.
So, e my father, meu pai trabalha comigo e às vezes ele fica assim, quando você vai voltar? Quando você... Ele fica querendo às vezes saber, mas eu não tenho um cronograma sempre muito delimitado.
So my dad works with me at the studio, so he's always asking me when are you getting back, but Sometimes I don't have like a pre-plan.
Mas outras vezes eu trabalho de maneira completamente obsessiva, então depende.
Other times I work completely obsessively, so it really depends.
Depende da energia da personagem que tá para vir.
Depends on the energy of the character that I'm working with, that it's coming through.
Thank you all for those answers. This your answers kind of flow very nicely into the next question, which is stillness as it relates to slowing down and living in the present can feel like such an antidote to technology and the pressures to perform with efficiency and speed above all else. How do you all protect your stillness?
I'll jump in this one. Textiles are just incredibly time consuming. There's a saying that weavers don't use clocks, they use calendars. And I say that often because it is true. But I think that inherently taking time is so important, and being proud of it. I think something I think about a lot is that the most time I feel like that I spend with my work is when it's unfinished. And then when it's done, that's actually when I see it the least. And so I think there's something to be said about living in that unfinished, the in-between state with the work, and really understanding the power that exists within that, and then how that can translate into how we live.
I want to surf on what you just said. I'm sitting right now in the studio with a bunch of paintings that I'm not finishing. And there's just tiny little bits of things that I need to do. I'm looking at them right now. I should be doing it, but it's kind of like finishing a work is kind of having to deal with that rupture of, especially if the work is leaving the studio, you know. And you might never see it again, right? So that relationship that you built, or the things that you unpacked or you uncovered, the people that you encountered in the process, like Tadáskía underlined many times, these are a relationship you will only have in the as an imagination, you know, as a sort of lingering feeling. And but at the same time, that's part of her job. You know what I mean? This kind of creating that or experiencing that rupture is kind of like it's just underlining a cycle, you know, a very particular kind of cycle that is part of what we do. Now, on the other end, in terms of organizing a moment of stillness and peace, especially the last few months, I've been terrible at it. I've been terrible at it, and I need to get better because it's changing the way that I'm relating with the work. Um, and there's nothing. My work saved my life many times, and I have to be careful to have a healthy relationship with it because because there's not a lot of things that can bring me back, and if I break that connection, then I don't know what I'm gonna do. So it's a very important exercise, at least for me.
Thank you for those answers. The last question is, did you all discover any unexpected symmetries in your work as the show is being installed?
I will say that even though I curated the show, it's always different when you see the work in person. And I thought it was like, so install was so fun, and like shout out to the whole team at Peter Bloom. So because it was, I mean, it was just such a fun install. But even like when the works came together and Abigail and Manuel using like a very similar color of green in their work, like I wouldn't have, that's not something I would have necessarily noticed in the photos as much as when you saw it in person, and just how everything energetically flowed together. Felt like it was really fortunate to be able to work with this group of artists on this show. So yeah, so even as a curator, you can be surprised once the work is actually in front of you.
Amazing. I guess that concludes our Q&A. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Auttrianna, Abigail, Manuel, Tadáskía, Sarah, Angela, Vinicius, and thank you, Kyle from Peter Bloom Gallery for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Marion Bolton Kippy Strown Foundation and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these weekday conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Daniel Rossler and Jessica Holmes on the story and work of Galeria Nara Rossler. And as is real tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Auttrianna.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations.
This is so
Bye.
fantastic.
Thank you,
Thank
Thank you.
Tadáskía.
Really
you
amazing.
so much.
Manuel.
Thank you all. Thank you,
Thank you,
Kyle,
Sarah.
Peter, David.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Abigail.
much. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Auttrianna.
Thank you.
Come see the show, everybody.
It's up until March 27th.
Oh,
Bye, everybody.
March 27th.
twice.
Thank you so much for your
Ciao.
translation, Vinicius.
Thank you, Vinicius. Obrigado.
Thank you, guys.
De nada.
Buddy.
You're welcome.
Congratulations. Thank you, Sarah. Ciao.
Thank you.